Ethan Parker's hand trembled as he reached for the door of Meridian and Company, Manhattan's most exclusive jewelry boutique. The brass handle felt cold against his palm, colder than it should have been for a May afternoon. He pulled the door open and stepped inside, letting the weight of conditioned air and hushed luxury settle over him like a shroud. The boutique was smaller than he expected. Ethan had purchased companies with lobbies larger than this single room, yet somehow the intimate space made his chest tighten. Recessed lighting cast a warm glow over glass cases that lined the walls, each one displaying rings that cost more than most people earned in a year. A faint scent of leather and something floral, jasmine maybe, hung in the air. Ethan adjusted his tie, a nervous habit he thought he'd abandoned in his 20s. His reflection caught in one of the glass cases showed a man who looked nothing like the boy who'd once slept on a futon in a Brooklyn studio apartment. The Tom Ford suit fit perfectly. The Patek Philippe on his wrist had a 6-month waiting list. His salt and pepper hair was cut precisely every 2 weeks by a barber who charged $300 and never spoke unless spoken to. He looked successful. He looked powerful. He looked like a man who knew exactly what he wanted. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 10 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Please subscribe to our channel and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now, let's continue. The blue velvet ring box in his jacket pocket suggested otherwise. A door behind the main counter opened, and Ethan prepared himself for the polished sales consultant he'd been promised when his assistant had made the appointment. Discretion guaranteed. Privacy assured. No media leaks. That was what mattered when you were finalizing an engagement that would be announced in the Wall Street Journal before your fiancé's family had finished toasting with champagne. But the woman who emerged from the back room wasn't the consultant. Ethan's world tilted sideways. Julia Kane stood 15 feet away, her dark hair pulled back in a way that exposed the elegant line of her neck. She wore a black dress, simple and perfectly tailored, with a silver pendant he didn't recognize. Her eyes, those eyes he'd once sworn held entire galaxies, met his for a fraction of a second before she looked down at something on the counter. The years had refined her. That was the word that came to him. Not aged, not changed, but refined. Like a sculpture that had been worked over and over until every unnecessary element had been stripped away, leaving only the essential form. "Mr. Parker," she said, her voice steady and professional. "Welcome to Meridian and Company. I'm Julia Kane, the lead designer. I understand you're interested in viewing some of our engagement pieces." Ethan's mouth went dry. He'd rehearsed what he'd say if he ever saw her again. 1,000 imaginary conversations during sleepless nights in hotel rooms across 3 continents. None of those rehearsals had prepared him for this moment, for the clinical politeness in her voice, for the way she said his name like he was just another client with just another appointment. "Julia," he managed. "I didn't know you worked here." "There's quite a lot we don't know about each other anymore," she replied, and the words landed with surgical precision. "Shall we begin? I have several designs that might suit your needs." That was when Ethan noticed the child. A little girl, perhaps 7 or 8, sat in a chair near the back wall. She had a sketchbook open on her lap and colored pencils spread across the small table beside her. Her hair was dark like Julia's, but her eyes, even from this distance, Ethan could see they were a peculiar shade of gray-blue that made his heart stutter. The girl looked up from her drawing and studied Ethan with an intensity that seemed far too knowing for someone her age. "Mom," the girl said quietly. "Who is he?" Julia's professional composure flickered for just a moment. She glanced at her daughter, then back at Ethan, and something passed through her expression that he couldn't quite read. Grief, maybe. Or resignation. "An old acquaintance, sweetheart," Julia said. "Mr. Parker is here to look at rings. Why don't you keep working on your drawing?" An old acquaintance. 12 years of marriage. 12 years of waking up beside each other, of learning how she took her coffee, of knowing that she hummed Billie Holiday when she painted and that she cried during documentaries about abandoned animals. 12 years of promising forever, of building a life, of believing that what they had was strong enough to survive anything. An old acquaintance. The girl returned to her sketchbook, but Ethan caught her glancing up at him every few seconds, her expression thoughtful and measuring. Julia moved behind the counter and began arranging velvet trays on the glass surface. Her hands were steady, efficient, practiced. I've selected several pieces based on the parameters your assistant provided, she said. You mentioned you were looking for something classic, but distinctive. Something that makes a statement without being ostentatious. Ethan stepped closer to the counter, his expensive Italian shoes silent on the boutique's thick carpet. The rings Julia displayed were extraordinary. He could see that even with his untrained eye. Clean lines, elegant proportions, stones that caught the light and threw it back in calculated bursts of brilliance. You designed these? He asked. I design all of the pieces in this collection, Julia said. Meridian and Company specializes in custom work for clients who want something unique. Each ring is one of a kind. How long have you been doing this? 7 years as lead designer. I started as an apprentice about 9 years ago. 9 years ago. The math hit Ethan like a physical blow. That was 2 years after their divorce. 2 years after he'd moved to San Francisco to chase the expansion deal that would eventually turn his modest tech startup into a billion-dollar empire. 2 years after he'd told Julia that everything he was doing was for them, for their future, and she'd looked at him with eyes full of exhausted sorrow and said there was no them anymore. These are beautiful, Ethan said, and he meant it. Each ring had a quality he struggled to articulate, a sense of intentionality, of purpose. These weren't just expensive objects. They were statements. They were promises made tangible. Thank you, Julia said. This one is platinum with a 2-carat center diamond, ethically sourced from a Canadian mine. The setting uses a modified bezel that protects the stone while maximizing light return. It's understated but architectural. She picked up the ring and held it out to him. Ethan took it, careful not to let their fingers touch. The ring was surprisingly heavy, substantial in a way that made him think of anchors and obligations. It's perfect, he said, though he had no idea if that was true. You haven't asked about the size, Julia pointed out. Right. Size 7, I think. My assistant said. Your assistant gave us all the specifications, Julia interrupted gently. I just wanted to make sure you'd actually checked. The implication hung in the air between them. Had he checked? Had he ever really paid attention to the details that mattered? Ethan thought of Victoria, his fiancée, her hand extended across a table at Le Bernardin, the light catching on her perfectly manicured nails as she'd laughed at something his CFO had said. He thought he remembered her hands being delicate, small. Size 7 seemed right. Seemed right. That was the best he could do. The ring will require a 30% deposit, Julia continued. The remaining balance is due upon completion. Timeline is approximately 6 weeks, though we can expedite for an additional fee if. Money isn't a concern, Ethan said, then immediately regretted how that sounded. How entitled. How exactly like the man he'd become. Julia's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Of course, she said. Then we can have it ready in 4 weeks. The little girl appeared at Julia's side, having abandoned her sketchbook. Up close, Ethan could see the resemblance more clearly. Julia's elegant bone structure, the same slight asymmetry to her smile. But those eyes. Those unsettling gray-blue eyes. Can I see? The girl asked, pointing at the ring still in Ethan's hand. Lily, Mr. Parker is conducting business, Julia said. It's okay, Ethan said quickly. He held the ring out to the girl, Lily, who took it with surprising reverence. She examined it closely, turning it in the light, squinting at the facets of the diamond. The angles are precise, she said. 57 facets if it's a standard round brilliant cut. Is it internally flawless? Ethan blinked. He looked at Julia, who sighed. VVS1, Julia told her daughter. Very, very slightly included. But the inclusions aren't visible to the naked eye. So functionally flawless, Lily said, nodding. She handed the ring back to Ethan. It's very pretty. Are you getting married? Lily, Julia said, her voice carrying a warning. I'm just asking, Lily said. People usually buy engagement rings when they're getting married. It's a logical question. Yes, Ethan said, looking directly at Julia. I'm getting married. Something in Julia's posture shifted, so subtle that anyone else might have missed it. But Ethan had spent years learning the language of her body, the tiny tells that betrayed what she was feeling when her face remained composed. The slight tension in her shoulders. The way her left hand moved to touch the silver pendant at her throat. Congratulations, Julia said, and her voice was perfectly neutral. I'm sure she'll love it. Do you love her? Lily asked. Lily. Julia's composure finally cracked. That's inappropriate. Go back to your drawing. Now. Lily studied Ethan for another long moment, then shrugged and returned to her chair. But as she walked away, she said over her shoulder, he didn't answer the question. An uncomfortable silence settled over the boutique. Ethan set the ring back on its velvet tray, suddenly desperate to be anywhere else. The walls felt like they were closing in. The jasmine scent had become cloying, suffocating. I should have the paperwork ready in just a moment, Julia said, turning to a computer on the back counter. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with quick efficiency. If you could just provide a credit card for the deposit. Julia, Ethan interrupted. She stopped typing but didn't turn around. Yes. How have you been? It was a stupid question. An inadequate question. What he really wanted to ask was, when did you start designing jewelry? When did you have a daughter? Why didn't you tell me? Are you happy? Do you ever think about Brooklyn? Do you ever think about me? Julia turned slowly. Her face was carefully neutral, but her eyes, those eyes he'd once thought he could read like a book, were unreadable. I've been well, thank you, she said. And you? I've read about your success. Parker Technologies is quite impressive. It's kept me busy, Ethan said. I imagine it has. Another silence, heavier than the last. She's remarkable, Ethan said, glancing at Lily. Your daughter. She is, Julia agreed, and for the first time, genuine warmth entered her voice. She's the best thing I've ever made. The words hit Ethan with unexpected force. The best thing I've ever made. Not the rings, not the career, not the life she'd built after their marriage collapsed. Her daughter. This strange, brilliant little girl with unsettling eyes and uncomfortable questions. How old is she? Ethan asked, though he'd already done the math 3 times in his head, each calculation leading to the same impossible conclusion. 7, Julia said, and held his gaze. She turned 7 in February. 7 years old. Born in February. Which meant conceived in. Ethan's mind reeled. May. She would have been conceived in May 9 years ago. May 9 years ago was 2 months before the San Francisco offer. 2 months before the final fight. 2 months before Julia had asked for a divorce and Ethan had been too shocked, too wounded, too convinced of his own righteousness to fight for what they had. He looked at Lily again, really looked at her. The eyes. The way she tilted her head when she was thinking. The precise, analytical way she'd examined the ring. Julia, he said quietly. Your paperwork is ready, she said, her voice suddenly sharp. She pulled a form from the printer and set it on the counter with more force than necessary. Sign here and here. Initial here. Deposit is $15,000. The balance will be due upon completion. Julia, I need to ask you something. You don't need to ask me anything, Mr. Parker. We're conducting a business transaction. That's all this is. But her hands were shaking now. Just slightly. Just enough. Ethan stood frozen at the counter, the paperwork blurring before his eyes. His heart hammered against his ribs with a force that made him wonder if Julia could hear it. The boutique suddenly felt airless, the walls pressing in from all sides. Is she mine? The words escaped before he could stop them. They hung in the perfumed air like an accusation. Julia's hand stilled on the counter. For 3 long seconds, she didn't move, didn't breathe. Then she straightened, her spine rigid, her composure reassembling itself like armor being buckled into place. That's not an appropriate question, she said quietly. Not appropriate. Ethan's voice rose despite himself. Julia, she's 7 years old. The timeline. The timeline is none of your business. Julia's voice remained steady, but her knuckles had gone white where she gripped the edge of the counter. You made your choice 9 years ago, Ethan. You chose San Francisco. You chose the expansion. You chose everything that wasn't us. I never knew. You never asked, Julia cut him off. You never called. You signed the divorce papers your lawyer sent and you disappeared into your empire. You made it very clear what mattered to you. Ethan glanced at Lily, who had gone very still in her chair. She wasn't drawing anymore. She was watching them with those two knowing eyes, her expression carefully blank in a way that suggested she'd learned to make herself invisible when adults started fighting. "Can we talk?" Ethan asked. "Privately." "No," Julia said flatly. "We can't. You came here to purchase a ring for your fiancé. Let's complete the transaction so you can get back to your life." "Julia, please. Sign the paperwork, Mr. Parker." The use of his formal name felt like a slap. Ethan picked up the expensive pen Julia had provided and signed where she'd indicated his signature, which had sealed billion-dollar deals and partnership agreements across 3 continents, now reduced to authorizing a ring for a woman whose hand size he'd had to guess at. Julia took the paperwork without looking at him and processed his credit card with brisk efficiency. The machine beeped its approval. $15,000 transferred in seconds. The easiest money Ethan had ever spent, and somehow the most expensive. "We'll contact you when the piece is ready," Julia said, handing him a receipt. "Is there anything else?" "Everything," Ethan wanted to say. "There's everything else." But he looked at Lily again, at the careful blankness in her face, and understood that he'd already caused enough damage for one afternoon. "No," he said. "Thank you." He turned toward the door, each step feeling like walking through concrete. His hand was on the brass handle when Lily's voice stopped him. "Mr. Parker." He turned. Lily had stood up from her chair and was holding her sketchbook. "I made this," she said, "while you were talking to my mom." She walked over and held out the sketchbook. Ethan took it, his hands unsteady. The drawing showed the boutique's interior with remarkable detail for a 7-year-old, the glass cases, the lighting, the careful arrangement of space. But in the center of the drawing, Lily had sketched 2 figures standing at the counter. A man and a woman. Between them, she'd drawn a space, small but precise, rendered in careful white pencil against the darker paper. The empty space between them was the focus of the entire composition. "You're very talented," Ethan managed. "I know," Lily said matter-of-factly. "My mom says I see things other people miss. The spaces between things. That's where the truth lives." Ethan looked at Julia, who had gone very pale. "Lily, that's enough," Julia said. "Go get your backpack. We're leaving soon." Lily took her sketchbook back and returned to her chair without another word. Ethan stood there, still holding the door, unable to make himself leave. "She's extraordinary," he said to Julia. "She is," Julia agreed. "And she's mine. Remember that." The door closed behind Ethan with a soft click that sounded like a period at the end of a sentence. He stood on the Manhattan sidewalk, surrounded by the familiar sounds of traffic and conversation and the general chaos of a Friday afternoon in the city, and realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so completely unmoored. His phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. "Still on for dinner tonight? Wear the navy suit, the blue one washes you out." Ethan stared at the message, then looked back at the boutique. Through the window, he could see Julia moving around the counter, could see Lily packing up her art supplies. They looked like a complete unit, a self-contained world that had no need for him. He'd spent 9 years building an empire. 9 years becoming exactly the man he'd always told himself he wanted to be. 9 years of success and achievement and proving that the kid from a middle-class family in Queens could compete with anyone. And he'd missed everything that mattered. The memories crashed over him then, unbidden and sharp. Brooklyn. God, it had been Brooklyn at the beginning, hadn't it? Before Manhattan, before the empire, before he'd learned to measure his worth in stock options and quarterly returns. Ethan closed his eyes and let himself remember. He was 26 and standing in the rain, his laptop bag held over his head in a futile attempt to stay dry. The presentation had been a disaster. 3 venture capitalists had listened to his pitch for exactly 11 minutes before the senior partner had cut him off mid-sentence with a dismissive wave. "It's been done," the man had said. "Come back when you have something original." Ethan had fled the office building into a downpour that matched his mood perfectly. He'd spent 6 months on that pitch. 6 months of 18-hour days, of maxed-out credit cards, of telling himself that this time, this meeting, this pitch would be the one that changed everything. He'd been wrong. The coffee shop appeared through the rain like a mirage, a small warm-looking place with steamed windows and a hand-painted sign that read the Wayward Bean. Ethan ducked inside, water streaming from his hair and jacket, his laptop bag clutched to his chest. Rough day. The voice came from behind the counter. Ethan looked up and saw a young woman about his age, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, a paint-stained apron over her jeans and t-shirt. She was smiling at him, not with pity but with genuine amusement at his bedraggled state. "Is it that obvious?" Ethan asked. "You look like a drowned cat that's also having an existential crisis," she said. "So yeah, pretty obvious." Despite everything, Ethan laughed. "Accurate assessment." "Coffee?" she asked. "On the house. You look like you need it." "I can pay," Ethan protested. "I'm sure you can. But I'm offering it free anyway. Call it an investment in your future success. When you're a billionaire, you can come back and buy this place." She said it lightly, like she was joking, but something in her eyes said, not looking up from his laptop. "We've got a major client presentation Monday and the deck isn't ready." "It's Saturday." "I know but..." "It's always something, Ethan." He looked up then, caught by something in her tone. Julia was standing by the window, backlit by morning sun, and he realized with a shock that he couldn't remember the last time he'd really looked at her. She'd cut her hair. When had that happened? And she looked thinner, her face more angular. "Jules, I'm sorry. Next weekend, I promise." "You promised that last weekend. And the weekend before that. This expansion is critical. Once we're established in Europe, things will calm down. I'll have more time." "No, you won't," Julia said quietly. "There will always be another expansion, another crisis, another reason why the company needs you more than I do." "That's not fair. I'm doing this for us." "Are you?" Julia turned to face him fully. "Because from where I'm standing, you're doing this for you. For the validation, for the success, for the proof that you're as good as you always believed you could be. And that's fine, Ethan. That's your choice. But don't pretend I'm part of the equation anymore." "You're being dramatic." "I'm being honest. When's the last time we had a real conversation? When's the last time you asked about my work?" Ethan's mind went blank. He couldn't remember. Days? Weeks? The realization hit him like cold water. "The Guggenheim show is next month," Julia continued. "I've been preparing for it for 6 months. Did you know that?" "Of course I knew that," Ethan lied. "What pieces am I showing?" Silence. "What's the theme of the exhibition?" Silence. "When is the opening?" Julia. "You don't know," she said, and there was no anger in her voice, just profound sadness. "You don't know because you haven't asked. Because you haven't been present for any of it." "I'll be there," Ethan said. "At the opening. I'll clear my schedule." "Will you?" Julia asked. "Because I don't think you will. I think something will come up with the company, something urgent and important, and you'll send me a text apologizing and promising to make it up to me later. And I'll go to my opening alone, and I'll smile when people ask where my husband is, and I'll make excuses for you because that's what I've been doing for 2 years now." "That's not," Ethan stopped. It was exactly what would happen. They both knew it. "I can't do this anymore," Julia said. "Do what?" "Be married to someone who isn't here." The words hung in the air like smoke. Ethan's laptop suddenly felt impossibly heavy on his legs. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm tired, Ethan. I'm tired of waiting for you to remember that we matter. I'm tired of being alone in a marriage. I'm tired of watching you disappear into something that will never love you back." "The company doesn't have to love me back. It's a business." "Exactly," Julia said. "And I'm a person. A person who needs more than financial security and a nice apartment and a husband who shows up once a week to sleep on the couch." "I'm building something important," Ethan said, hearing the defensiveness in his own voice. "I thought you understood that. You're the one who told me not to quit." "I told you not to quit on your dream. I didn't tell you to quit on us." "I haven't quit on us." "Haven't you?" Julia's voice was soft now, almost gentle. "Look at me, Ethan. Really look at me. When's the last time you saw me? When's the last time we made love? When's the last time we stayed up talking about anything other than your schedule?" Ethan opened his mouth and found he had no answer. I want a divorce, Julia said. The words didn't make sense. They were sounds without meaning, a foreign language he'd never learned. You don't mean that. I do. Julia's eyes were dry, her voice steady. This wasn't a decision made in anger. This was a decision made over months of careful thought, of hope dying by degrees. I've already talked to a lawyer. I'll file next week. It can be simple, we don't have kids, and I don't want anything from the company. I just want out. Jules, please. We can fix this. I can change. I can. I don't want you to change for me, Julia interrupted. I want you to want to change for yourself. And you don't. You love what you're building more than you love what we had. That's okay, Ethan. But I can't stay and watch it anymore. She left the room then, leaving Ethan sitting on the couch with his laptop and his client presentation and the sudden vertiginous feeling that he'd been standing on the edge of a cliff for years without realizing it, and had just looked down. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. Julia moved out of the Manhattan apartment into a place in Brooklyn, returning to the borough where they'd begun, Ethan thought, though he didn't say it out loud. She took her artwork and her plants and half of the kitchen equipment they'd accumulated. She left the expensive furniture, the view of the park, the evidence of everything they'd achieved together. Ethan threw himself into work with even more intensity. If he worked hard enough, if he made the company successful enough, maybe the hollow feeling in his chest would go away. Maybe he'd stop waking up at 3 a.m. reaching for someone who wasn't there. The San Francisco expansion happened 6 months after the divorce. It was everything Ethan had worked toward: a major West Coast office, partnerships with tech giants, a valuation that made him a billionaire on paper. He moved to California and told himself it was for the company, that it made logical sense, that Julia's absence from New York made it easier to start fresh. He didn't let himself think about the fact that he was running away. 9 years passed like water through his fingers. The company grew exponentially. Ethan became the kind of person who got written about in Forbes and invited to speak at TED. He bought a house in Palo Alto, joined the right boards, dated the right women, successful, beautiful women who understood that work came first and didn't expect more than he was willing to give. He met Victoria at a charity gala. She was the daughter of a venture capitalist, a lawyer herself, with perfect posture and an MBA from Wharton. She was exactly the kind of partner who made sense for someone at his level. When he proposed, it was at a restaurant with a Michelin star, and the ring, designed by someone whose name he'd been assured mattered, cost more than his first year's salary. Victoria had said yes immediately, already calculating how the announcement should be timed for maximum social impact. It was efficient. It was appropriate. It was exactly what Ethan's life had become. And now, standing outside a jewelry boutique in Manhattan where his ex-wife designed rings and raised a daughter who might be his, Ethan understood with perfect clarity that he'd spent 9 years building a life that meant nothing. His phone buzzed again. Victoria, Ethan? Dinner? He looked at the message, then at the boutique window. Julia was locking up, getting ready to leave. Lily stood beside her, backpack on her shoulders, still watching Ethan through the glass with those unsettling gray-blue eyes. Ethan made a decision. He typed a response to Victoria. Something's come up. Can we reschedule? The reply came immediately. Are you serious? I've had this on the calendar for 2 weeks. I'm sorry. Family emergency. You don't have family in New York. Ethan stared at that message. Technically, Victoria was right. His parents had retired to Arizona. He had a sister in Seattle he saw once a year at Christmas. In the carefully curated life he'd built, there was no family in New York that required his immediate attention. Except maybe there was. He turned off his phone and waited outside the boutique until Julia and Lily emerged. Julia saw him immediately and stopped, her hand instinctively moving to Lily's shoulder in a protective gesture. What are you doing? Julia asked. Waiting for you, Ethan said. I know you told me to leave. I know I don't have any right to ask. But I need to talk to you. Really talk. Not a business transaction. Not, he gestured helplessly. Not whatever that was in there. I have nothing to say to you. Then just listen. Please. Give me 20 minutes. If after 20 minutes you still want me to disappear forever, I will. I'll pick up the ring when it's ready and you'll never see me again. Julia studied him for a long moment. Lily was watching both of them, her expression unreadable. There's a park 2 blocks from here, Julia said finally. Lily likes the swings. We were going there anyway. You can walk with us. It wasn't permission, but it wasn't refusal either. Ethan fell into step beside them, acutely aware of the space Julia maintained between them, close enough for conversation, far enough to maintain distance. Lily walked slightly ahead, her backpack bouncing with each step. Every few seconds she'd glance back at Ethan, still studying him with that disconcerting intensity. You want to know if she's yours, Julia said quietly. It wasn't a question. Yes, Ethan admitted. Why? What difference does it make now? Every difference. No difference. I don't know. Ethan struggled to find words for the chaos in his head. I just need to know. Why? So you can write a check? Establish a trust fund? Ease your conscience. So I can understand what I missed, Ethan said. They reached the park, a small neighborhood space with playground equipment and a few benches surrounding a patch of grass. Lily immediately ran to the swings, leaving her backpack on a bench. Julia sat down, and after a moment's hesitation, Ethan joined her. They watched Lily pump her legs, gaining height with each arc, her dark hair flying behind her. She is yours, Julia said quietly. If that's what you're asking. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He'd suspected, of course, done the math a dozen times. But hearing it confirmed, hearing it stated as simple fact, was different. Why didn't you tell me? I tried, Julia said. I called you 3 times the week after I found out. You never answered. I sent emails. They went into whatever void your assistant maintains. And then I realized, you didn't want to hear from me. You'd moved on. You'd chosen your path. Why would I drag you back for something you'd made clear you didn't want? I would have wanted to know about my child. Would you? Julia turned to look at him fully. Be honest, Ethan. If I'd managed to reach you 9 years ago, if I'd told you I was pregnant, what would you have done? Ethan opened his mouth to give the automatic answer, that he would have come back, that he would have been there, that everything would have been different. But Julia's eyes stopped him. She deserved honesty, even if it was ugly. I don't know, he admitted. I was so focused on the company, on proving myself. I was angry about the divorce. I felt like you'd given up on us. I gave up on competing with your work, Julia corrected. There's a difference. I see that now. Do you? Julia asked. Because I'm not sure you do. You showed up at my workplace today to buy a ring for another woman. You're still making the same choices, Ethan. Still prioritizing everything except the people who might actually matter. That's not fair. Isn't it? You're engaged to someone whose ring size you don't know. You're about to marry someone you can't confidently say you love when your 7-year-old daughter asks you a direct question. Those aren't the choices of someone who's learned anything. Lily called out from the swings, Mom, watch this. She launched herself from the swing at the height of its arc, flying through the air before landing in a crouch on the mulch. It was reckless and perfectly executed. Lily. Julia stood up, alarm clear in her voice. We've talked about this. You could hurt yourself. But I didn't, Lily pointed out, brushing mulch from her hands. I calculated the trajectory and the landing angle. It was safe. Calculated the trajectory, Julia muttered, sitting back down. She's 7 years old and she's calculating trajectories. Is she always like that? Ethan asked. Like what? That precise. That analytical. Julia smiled, but there was sadness in it. Always. She tested into the gifted program at 4. Her teachers say she's probably on the spectrum, high-functioning autism, they think, though we're still doing evaluations. She sees patterns in everything. Numbers, shapes, social dynamics. She understands systems better than people, but she's working on it. She's amazing, Ethan said. She's exhausting, Julia said, but her voice was full of love. She asks approximately 8,000 questions a day. She corrects my math when I'm calculating tips. She points out logical fallacies in arguments. Last week she told me my approach to parallel parking was inefficient and suggested a better algorithm. An algorithm for parallel parking. She drew me a diagram. Ethan laughed, and it felt strange, like a muscle he'd forgotten how to use. She sounds exactly like. He stopped, but Julia finished the thought. Like you, she said. She sounds exactly like you. The way you used to be, before you forgot how to see anything except work. They sat in silence for a moment, watching Lily, who had abandoned the swings to examine something in the grass with intense focus. What's her full name? Ethan asked. Lily Julia Kane, Julia said. No middle name. I couldn't decide on one that felt right. You didn't use my last name. You weren't there. The simple truth of it hurt more than any accusation could have. Julia wasn't being cruel. She was stating a fact. Tell me about her, Ethan said. Please. I want to know everything. Julia hesitated, then began to speak, slowly at first, then with increasing warmth as she fell into the familiar rhythm of talking about her daughter. She was born February 14th. Valentine's Day, which she finds statistically interesting given the unlikelihood of being born on any specific date. She walked at 9 months and was speaking in full sentences by 18 months. Her first words were more book, which should tell you everything about her personality. She doesn't like loud noises or scratchy fabrics. She'll only eat foods that are organized on her plate. Nothing can touch. She reads at a 6th grade level but still sleeps with a stuffed elephant named Mr. Rational, because she decided that was a logical name for a comfort object. She's terrible at sports because she overthinks every movement, but she's extraordinary at chess. She can spend hours working on a single drawing, getting every detail perfect. She once spent 3 days drawing the pigeons in our neighborhood, documenting their behavioral patterns. Documenting pigeon behavior, Ethan repeated, charmed despite himself. She's unique, Julia said simply. Raising her alone has been the hardest thing I've ever done. But also the best. You didn't have to do it alone, Ethan said quietly. Yes, I did, Julia corrected. Because you weren't there. And even if I'd managed to reach you, even if you'd come back, you wouldn't have really been there. Not in the way that mattered. You would have been physically present but mentally absent, always halfway to your next meeting, always calculating the next business move. I could have changed. You didn't want to change, Julia said. That's what you've never understood, Ethan. Change isn't something that happens to you. It's something you choose, every day, in 1,000 small decisions. And you kept choosing work. You kept choosing the empire over everything else. Lily ran back over, slightly breathless. There's a spider building a web between the bench and that tree, she announced. It's an orb weaver. Genus Araneus. The web architecture is really sophisticated. She's using radial threads for structure and spiral threads for catching prey. Did you know spider silk is stronger than steel by weight? I did not know that, Ethan said. Lily studied him again with those piercing eyes. You're still here, she observed. I am. Why? I'm talking to your mom. About what? Lily, Julia said gently. Remember we talked about personal boundaries? I remember, Lily said. But this seems important. He's been standing outside the store for 17 minutes. That's unusual behavior. It suggests emotional investment beyond a business transaction. Julia closed her eyes briefly. Sometimes, she said to Ethan, I forget she's 7. I'm precocious, Lily said matter-of-factly. Mrs. Henderson says it's a blessing and a curse. Who's Mrs. Henderson? Ethan asked. My teacher. She's very patient. Most teachers don't like when you point out their mistakes, but Mrs. Henderson says I'm helping her be more accurate. Ethan found himself smiling. That's very generous of her. That's what Mom says. Lily tilted her head. Are you my dad? The question landed like a grenade in the middle of the quiet park. Julia went very still beside him. Lily, she said carefully. That's not. It's a logical question, Lily interrupted. You said he was an old acquaintance, but you used your stressed voice. You only use your stressed voice about Dad. And his eyes are the same color as mine. And he does that thing where he tilts his head when he's thinking, which I also do. The probability suggests a biological connection. Julia looked at Ethan, something helpless in her expression. This was his moment. His choice. He could deflect, could tell Lily this was a conversation for adults, could buy himself time to process the magnitude of what was happening. Instead, he heard himself say yes. Lily nodded, processing this information with her characteristic analytical approach. I thought so. Does this mean you're going to be around more? Ethan looked at Julia, who was watching him with an unreadable expression. I'd like to be. If that's okay with your mom. Mom. Lily turned to Julia. Is it okay? Julia took a long, shaky breath. I don't know, sweetheart. This is complicated. Ethan and I need to talk more. Adult talk. But whatever happens, you're my priority. You'll always be my priority. I know that, Lily said simply. You tell me every day. I do, don't I? Julia's voice was thick with emotion. Can I go back to watching the spider? Lily asked. Yes. Stay where I can see you. Lily ran off, apparently satisfied with the earth-shaking revelations of the past 5 minutes. Julia and Ethan sat in stunned silence. I'm sorry, Ethan said. I shouldn't have just told her like that. I should have asked you first, should have. No, Julia interrupted. You did the right thing. She asked a direct question. She deserved a direct answer. That's how we've always done things. She's remarkable. She is. Julia was quiet for a moment. She asks about you sometimes, you know. About her father. I've always told her the truth, that you're a good person who wasn't ready to be a parent. That sometimes adults make choices that hurt people without meaning to. That absence doesn't mean lack of love. I didn't know, Ethan said. Jules, I swear if I'd known. You would have what? Flown back from San Francisco? Disrupted your expansion? Restructured your entire life around a child you'd never planned for? Julia shook her head. I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm trying to be realistic. You'd built exactly the life you wanted. A child didn't fit into that life. Maybe I built the wrong life, Ethan said quietly. Julia looked at him sharply. Don't, she said. Don't do that. Don't show up 9 years later with regrets and expect that to change anything. You can't undo the past, Ethan. You can't get back the newborn phase, the first steps, the first words. You missed all of it. Those moments are gone. I know, Ethan said, and his voice cracked. God, Jules, I know. And I hate myself for it. I hate that I wasn't there. I hate that I chose wrong. I hate that it took seeing her, seeing you, to understand what I'd thrown away. But you're still engaged to someone else, Julia pointed out. You're still wearing that expensive watch and that expensive suit. You're still the CEO of a billion-dollar company. Nothing about your life has actually changed except now you feel guilty about it. What do you want me to do? Ethan asked. Tell me and I'll do it. That's not how this works. Julia's composure finally cracked. I don't want you to do anything because I told you to. I don't want you to play father because you feel obligated. Lily deserves better than that. She deserves someone who wants to be there, not someone who's going through the motions to assuage his conscience. I do want to be there. Do you? Or do you just want to not feel like the villain in your own story? Julia stood up, pacing. You know what the hardest part has been? Not the money, though that was brutal at first. Not the exhaustion, though God knows there was plenty of that. The hardest part was answering Lily's questions about why her father wasn't there. Do you know how hard it is to explain to a small child that she's not the reason? That sometimes adults are just too broken or too selfish or too scared to show up. I wasn't scared, Ethan protested. You were terrified, Julia countered. You've always been terrified. That's why you work 80-hour weeks. That's why you built an empire. You've been running from the possibility of failure your entire life. And relationships, real ones, messy ones, ones that require vulnerability, those are the ultimate risk because you can't control them. You can't optimize them. You can't treat them like a business problem to be solved. The truth of it hit Ethan like a fist to the chest. She was right. She'd always been right about him, able to see through his carefully constructed armor to the frightened kid underneath who was desperate to prove he mattered. So what do I do? He asked. Tell me how to fix this. You can't fix it, Julia said. It's not a bug in your code. It's not a market problem to be solved. It's life, Ethan. It's messy and complicated, and there's no algorithm for being a good parent. Then teach me, Ethan said. Please. I know I don't deserve it. I know I have no right to ask. But I want to know her. I want to be part of her life. I'll do whatever you need. Whatever boundaries you set. I'll prove that I can show up. Julia was silent for a long time, watching Lily crouch beside the spiderweb, her face wrapped with concentration. If I let you into her life, Julia said finally, and you disappear again, it will destroy her. She's already built a worldview that accommodates your absence. If you become present and then leave, it will teach her that she's not enough. That she's not worth staying for. And I can't let that happen. I won't. I won't disappear, Ethan said. You don't know that. An emergency will come up. A crisis. A deal that needs your immediate attention. And you'll choose work because that's what you've always chosen. That's who you are. Maybe I can change who I am. People don't change, Ethan. Not really. Not at their core. Then maybe I can choose differently, Ethan said. Maybe I can keep being who I am but make different decisions about what matters. Julia looked at him for a long moment. You're engaged, she said. You came to my store to buy a ring for another woman. What happens with that? Ethan thought of Victoria. Of the perfectly planned wedding, the carefully curated guest list, the life they'd mapped out together with the precision of a business strategy. He thought of how she'd looked when he proposed, pleased but not surprised, already calculating the announcement timing. He thought of how different it had been with Julia. The rain, the coffee, the complete certainty that had hit him like lightning. I need to have a conversation, he said. A difficult one. Don't blow up your life because you feel guilty, Julia warned. That's not fair to anyone. I'm not, Ethan said. I'm blowing up my life because it's the wrong life. It has been for years. I just didn't let myself see it. Lily came running back over. Mom, can we get ice cream? There's a place 2 blocks from here and they have strawberry, which is statistically the third most popular flavor after vanilla and chocolate. Julia looked at Ethan, something softening in her face. Do you want to come? She asked. Not as a father. Not as anything except someone we know. Someone who's trying. It was the smallest opening. A crack in the door. But it was something. I'd like that, Ethan said. More than anything. They walked to the ice cream shop, Lily between them, narrating facts about ice cream production and the chemistry of freezing point depression. Ethan listened, genuinely fascinated, watching Julia's face as she smiled at their daughter's enthusiastic lecture. The shop was tiny, one of those neighborhood places that had probably been there for decades. Lily ordered strawberry in a cup because cones were structurally inefficient. Ethan got coffee. Julia got chocolate. They sat at a small table by the window, and Lily asked Ethan questions with the relentless curiosity of someone who'd spent 7 years being curious about a missing person. What do you do for work? I run a technology company. We help freelancers find work. That's altruistic. Most companies maximize profit extraction. Where did you learn that phrase? Ethan asked, amused. Mom talks about capitalism sometimes, Lily said. She has strong opinions about wealth distribution. She always did, Ethan said, glancing at Julia, who was trying not to smile. Do you like your job? Lily asked. I used to think I did, Ethan said carefully. Now I'm not sure. Why? Because I think I confused liking the work with liking how the work made me feel important. Lily considered this. That's an honest answer. Most adults lie when kids ask hard questions. I'm trying not to do that, Ethan said. Good, Lily said. I don't like being lied to. Even nice lies. Mom never lies to me, even when the truth is hard. Ethan looked at Julia, who was watching him with guarded hope in her eyes. He understood the enormity of what she was offering, a chance. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but a chance to prove he could be someone different than who he'd been. If I wanted to get to know you better, Ethan said to Lily, would that be okay with you? Would you tell me the truth about things? Lily asked. Yes. Would you remember that I don't like loud noises or sudden changes? I would. Would you understand that sometimes I need to be alone to process things? I would try to. Lily looked at her mother. Can he? Julia took a deep breath. We can try. Slowly. With rules. If, she looked at Ethan, if you're serious about this. If you're willing to put in the work, to show up consistently, to understand that parenting isn't a project with a completion date, it's a lifelong commitment. I understand, Ethan said. I don't think you do, Julia said. But maybe you'll learn. They finished their ice cream in careful, cautious conversation. Lily explained her current favorite subjects, mathematics and entomology, her concerns about climate change, extensive, and her opinion on superhero movies, formulaic but emotionally satisfying. When they stood to leave, Lily handed Ethan her sketchbook again. I want you to keep the drawing, she said, of the boutique, with the empty space. Why? Ethan asked. Because empty spaces can be filled, Lily said. If you're careful. If you pay attention to what fits. You can't force things into spaces they don't belong. But if you're patient, if you wait for the right moment, sometimes the space becomes full. She said it like she was talking about art. But Ethan understood she was talking about something much larger. Julia walked him back toward the subway, Lily skipping ahead. I meant what I said, Ethan told her quietly. I want to be part of this. I want to know her. He stopped. I want a chance to be someone better than who I've been. Call me next week, Julia said. We'll set something up. Lunch, maybe. Somewhere public. We'll see how it goes. Thank you, Ethan said. Jules, thank you. Don't thank me yet, Julia said. Prove it first. Show me you can do this. Show Lily you can do this. Then we'll talk. He watched them descend into the subway, Lily's small hand in Julia's, two people who'd built a life without him. A good life. A full life. But maybe, if he was very careful, if he made very different choices than he'd made before, there might be room in that life for him too. Ethan pulled out his phone and looked at Victoria's texts, increasingly annoyed, demanding to know where he was, reminding him they had obligations, expectations, a plan. He typed, we need to talk. In person. Tomorrow. I'm sorry. Then he called his assistant. I need you to clear my schedule for the next week, he said. Sir, you have 3 board meetings and... Cancel them. All of them. Tell the board I have a family emergency. You don't have family in New York, his assistant said, confused. I do now, Ethan said and hung up. He stood on the street corner for a long time, holding Lily's drawing of empty space, watching people flow past him with their complicated lives and their messy relationships and their imperfect choices. For the first time in 9 years, Ethan Parker was exactly where he needed to be. Not in a boardroom. Not at a conference. Not building an empire. He was standing still. He was paying attention. He was, for the first time in almost a decade, early to something that mattered. The ring in his pocket, the one for Victoria, the one that represented everything he thought his life should be, felt impossibly heavy. Tomorrow he would return it. He would have the difficult conversation. He would begin the work of dismantling the life he'd built and constructing something different, something better, something real. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing about this would be easy. Lily was right. You couldn't force things into spaces they didn't belong. But you could be patient. You could be careful. You could wait for the right moment and hope that empty spaces could be filled. Ethan looked down at the drawing again, at the careful white space between 2 figures. A space that suggested absence but also possibility. A space that could remain empty forever, or could become something neither figure had imagined when they first stood apart. He folded the drawing carefully and put it in his pocket opposite the ring. Then he started walking, not toward his hotel, not toward his next meeting, but toward the park where his daughter was learning to see patterns in spiderwebs and where his ex-wife had somehow managed to build a beautiful life from the wreckage of their marriage. He had so much to learn. But for the first time, he was ready to be taught.